few excerpts from my memoir, I Am Home Within Myself. I thought tonight I wouldn't read one essay because there are probably about 28 of them in there. So in Jamaica, we have this thing called a mashup, which you might call a medley. And so I'll do excerpts from several essays for you tonight. The first is inhale, exhale, breathe. The year before my birth, the sun's light was not the only source of heat sneaking beneath clothing. On opposite ends of my beautiful island, the mystery of attraction was burgeoning heat of the erotic kind in the lives of two young couples, a farm worker, Vivian, and his lover, Lorna, and a pastor, Gerald, and his wife, Lurleen. They were young and in love, their bodies unexplored terrains. It would be months before moments shared between new lovers would manifest into abdomens stretching with new life, and months before, two women, strangers at best, met at the nexus of Spalding Hospital, each of them inhaling, exhaling through contractions that would create a lifetime bond. That's the first part of the essay that was published in the New York Times. And of course, if you want to read it or listen to it, it's available online. The next essay is Seek It to Find. I was the only baby in Moss Sparky's one-room rum bar, perched like a bird atop my father's shoulders. My bare feet dangled on his youthful chest, and my ears were open to the ramblings of men who had consumed a copious amount of rum. Their feet no longer moved with the rhythmic skank of island men, but instead stuttered beneath them, buckling into a fall. This was how I spent my Saturday afternoons. Come Sunday, I was a cute and chunky little baby, dressed in a frock of frills, skin shining from Vaseline, and smelling of baby powder. I sat beside my mother on the pews of Mount Olivet Church, absorbing the hallelujahs and amens of the island's faithful. My first social atmosphere were as diametrical as my parents'. My mother was a religious, Bible-believing, church-going, Holy Ghost-filled woman who ate her share of the daily bread from the Holy Book, preferably the King James Version. My father, on the other hand, was worldly, open to life outside of the reach of the Holy Rod, and more likely to be filled with liquid spirits than the ghostly kind. My parents' connection was the pull of youthful need and the mystery of desire. The Bible and the bar would remain the biggest contention in my parents' relationship. They wed at my grandparents' countryside home in June of 1981, 2 months after I was born. According to the church and Jamaican traditions, I was born a bastard. I'm listening. My parents were great storytellers. They were maybe descendants of griots in West Africa who gathered community afore fire, chronicled the village's history, and narrated in detail the challenges and triumphs of their ancestral life cycles. The griots told stories of passion, exaggeration, intonation, the rise and fall of voices accompanied by the crackling fire. It would be these stories, laden with resilience and lightened with humor, that would sustain, light the candle of hope, and keep them humming through the myriad faces of enslavement. Like the fire near their feet, stories kept their souls somewhat warm. This type of storytelling was passed on to my parents, who added their own flair. They each had different ways of delivering their tales in an effort to sear meaning to the psyche of the listeners. My mother's lineage must have been from a tribe whose philosophy won up the adage, "It takes a village to raise a child," and instead declares, "It takes an excruciatingly lengthy story to raise a child well." Like her Sunday morning prayers that stretched on for a solid 21 minutes, her stories have always been wordy. Channeling the late Jamaican folklorist Louis Bennett, my mother orated folk tales impressed upon her in primary school. swaying her body to music heard in distant memory. She dressed each word in the rhythmics of her mother tongue. When the stories belonged to her, the brown of her skin softened and her eyes brightened. As for the words that left her mouth, they journeyed through the canal of my ear, leading me like warm hands into the setting of her life as a child. My father was more of a comedian. He was a dancing man. Sometimes it was his gyrating that added an extra oomph to his stories. As though I was standing now amidst the crowd gathered in our backyard for a party my father's hosting, I could feel the energy of the people, some whispering in ears, some telling tall tales while sipping on rum punch, and a few holding the necks of Heineken bottles between their fingers. My father stands, the voices hush. A dented circle forms around him. He winks at me and begins to tell the story, the case of Nafti. Nafti, my father begins, was a real fool. Nafti had migrated from Jamaica to the United States in later years as a middle-aged man. He was illiterate, but that didn't stop him from getting a license and driving the roads of Irvington, New Jersey, with a confidence only a Jamaican can muster. He was pulled over one too many times by police and was caught red-handed holding a spliff, as if all was well with his actions. The cops arrived at the car window and were overwhelmed with the scent of ganja. When Nafti received a subpoena, he invited his friends to court. He wore a light blue three-piece suit and a pair of dark blue shoes with tassels. When the bailiff asked him to put his right hand on the Bible and swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, Nafti placed his left hand on the Bible, then his right. He continued this for a while until he started twisting his legs to match his hands, a mashup of salsa and scat ensuing. The people in the courtroom laughed uncontrollably to the point where they could hardly discern the judge's unsteady bang of the gavel. A few chuckles escaped from the judge, who was also being distracted by this grown man who dared to disrupt his courtroom by dancing the Macarena. My father has captivated his audience. The dented circles of onlookers is enraptured by my father's boisterous voice and the character of Nafti. Everyone laughs. Some slap their knees and the shoulders of their neighbors. Others tilt their head back to hold joy tears from their eyes. My father waits for the perfect pause. Then he continues. The poor bastard didn't know his left from his right. The backyard swells again with merriment. My father's intentions were clear. Keep the vibes alive, the cheeks high, the teeth showing, and the belly balled up in stitches. He accomplished this each time he had an audience. Wide open closed. It is sheer grace that does not allow the memory of my grandmother prying my 6-year-old body from my mother's arms. She was migrating to the United States, leaving my 4-year-old sister and my 9-month-old brother, who was not yet old enough to understand the power of his feet. My grandparents were naively hospitable. An older cousin, 15 years my senior, had appeared and remained with us forever, it seemed. He was always present. The open fields where I once played fearlessly became a battleground, far too large for my young eyes to scan. The security of yesteryear no longer enveloped me. The days of being carefree had been lifted, and worry laid its arms around me in its stead, forcing me to play with caution. I did nothing in peace. I polished the red floor, then pushed and pulled the coconut brush across the veranda, with the fear of him as a shadow looming over me. He was like an eyelash falling. I never saw or felt him coming. He lay waiting for me in the little pit toilet in the coffee field. One late afternoon in the fields, he grabbed my arm. His palm was clammy when he caught my wrist and forced me to the ground. I could smell his body, a rancid mix of grass, dirt, and sweat. When he tried to pull my dress over my head, I kicked my legs, aiming to hurt, and sank my teeth into his flesh, aiming to draw blood. I ran. tasted his dirty flesh as my tiny 8-year-old feet trampled the grounds and destroyed the flowers in my path. I found refuge in the woodlands above our house and sat on a patch of red dirt beneath a tree. I was exhausted. I waited for my mind to realize I was free, but it would take years for my spirit and my mind to meet. Fall. I have had, without fail, 3 reoccurring dreams. In one, I am no longer the Jamaican who was gawked at for not knowing how to swim. Instead, my non-aquatic body is the ocean. I am the tempestuous wave and I am the gentle water, cleansing sand from bare feet. In another dream, I'm above in the heavens, resting on air, floating like clouds and creatures of flight. My eyes are feasting on green pastures, silver water, and mountains dressed in white. I fly over all of them, free and light. I go with ease into these worlds, into the ocean and up in the skies. The third dream is the uprooting of all I know. This dream has me neither flying nor swimming. I am between ocean and sky. I am here on earth, and it is this dream I dread. The dream begins with a slight opening of my lips, gently pulling my cheek up towards my eyes, revealing my teeth. I stand in this moment, the epitome of beauty, a group of onlookers pleased by the sight of me. I can feel them, but my eyes cannot see the faces they wear. It is then that one of my molars is uprooted and shatters, each particle agitating with the slightest touch, the teeth that remain. All my teeth uproot and burst into tiny pieces, causing an avalanche in my mouth. In my dream, my lips perform their own act of preservation, pressing tightly together to seal my mouth. My lips fail, and just before the bedrock of teeth and streams of blood spill out, I awake in terror, afraid and trembling. My parents' marriage was turbulent, adorable, and real. I have vivid memories of my parents greeting each other. I can hear my father whistling his way up the 18 steps to our home on the 2nd floor. My mother sashays her way over to the door to greet him. They are both standing beneath an exposed light bulb turned on and off by a long dangling string. He's bending his knees and long torso to meet my mother's smiling face, reaching his hand around her thighs and pulling her up so his strong arms become a chair. Her feet are suspended just beneath my father's feet. Their faces meet, and as they come eye to eye, their lips half open, as though rehearsed, invite each other in for a taste. I surprised my father would whisper something decadent in my mother's ear, because she would fold her face into his neck and shake with laughter. My father was an enigma for my mother. He was the source of her ease and the cause of her burden. With the exception of their common stance on education, my parents had varying ideologies, especially about family life. While my mother worked under the table as a nanny during the day, she was normally home by 6 o'clock. My father, on the other hand, had plans to be elsewhere. He would grace us with his presence for dinner. However, immediately following, he would leave for his reign as vice man at the pool hall and return only after we had gone to bed, sometime late in the early morning hours. It was not the jingling of his keys that would summon us to his arrival. Instead, it was my mother's muffled litany of irritation and my father's soothing answers. My mother would laugh under his whispers, and he would win her over again and again. Underneath my mother's calm exterior, there was unexpressed contention that turned into dizzy spells and fainting. She grew physically ill. The first few times my mother fainted, I called an ambulance, but its arrival proved unnecessary. Minutes before the flashing lights and sirens turned the corner onto Aldine Street, my mother regained consciousness. She clasped the task she had left hanging midair and continued as if nothing had happened. After a while, we created protocol for such instances. I held her head on my lap and fanned her face aggressively, while my sister or brother drenched her brow with cold water and wiped her face. We fanned, wiped, repeated until she was back with us on our side of the light. The life force was being leashed from my mother because of her determination to make my father a homebody. She wanted him to stay home, engage us in conversation, and go to church with us on Sundays. She pursued, he protested, we watched, she snapped. Big Daddy. There's a picture of my father standing slightly off kilter, wearing a fedora hat tipped to the side, a white fishnet vest, and an 80s unisex sports shorts. His body is a statue of masculinity, muscles and veins intertwined. For the rare nights he stayed home and prepared for bed, he wore a striped navy and white nightshirt, the words, Big Daddy, embroidered on it. My father had ignored the internal warnings of his deceased body, and the illness was finally revealing itself externally. His body was losing its tall, lean, and muscular stature. His feet had ballooned in size, appearing as though, with a prick of a pin, water would come rushing from them. His belly grew, mimicking the early bulge of a woman in her second trimester, or of a snake that had just swallowed a large egg. The whites of his eyes had taken on a dirty red and yellow hue, and as though they were both jaundiced and bleeding. It's strange. We know the truths common to all. We're born to live, we live a while, then we die. But death seems to always surprise us. The doctor's words attacked my mother first, slapped my sister and me a few seconds later. My brother was 12 years old at the time and had not understood what was being said. My mother recognized his unknowing face and gently, as though not to crack the concrete floor, walked over to him. Her words trailed off in a whisper, but with the force of a mule kicked my brother in the back. He fell face forward onto the glossy gray floor. Big Daddy was dead.